and I am your host. Before we start our session, please make sure you select the English channel and the interpretation button down below if English is your preferred language. للي حابين يسمعوا الحوار باللغة العربية ممكن أن تغيرون القناة من اللغة الإنجليزية أسفل الشاشة تحت. At the bottom bar in your Zoom screen, you can also find the Q&A tab. Just put in your questions and we will get to them towards the end of our talk. You can also find us on YouTube streaming live on Shuruq's channel, Shuruq SHJ. Share it with your friends if Zoom was not an option for them. Going through the recent pandemic has opened up our eyes to the preparedness of our cities to be able to morph and change according to the demands of the environment and shockwaves of any future economic, social, and technological changes. How resilient are our cities and how can we work together to develop them and design them in the right way? Discussing this subject, I would like to welcome our speakers, Ms. Olivia Duncan, Associate Planner at the Department of Municipalities and Transport, Abu Dhabi, Mr. Ahmed Al-Ali, founder of X-Architects, and Mr. Hervoy Sindrik, Associate and Middle East Urbanism Leader at Arab. To our speakers, you can show us yourselves basically. Hello. Thank you for joining us. And please introduce yourself. Olivia, maybe we can start with you. Just a brief introduction about yourself. What have you been doing in the region?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a trained architect. I grew up in Brazil, so I started studying architecture back then at a young age. And then I moved to New Zealand, because I'm half Kiwi, and I completed my undergraduate there in architecture. But when I moved to the Gulf, so I arrived in Abu Dhabi in 2009, I was very lucky to be working at a different scale. So I worked with cities, with master planning, with urban design for the what was called Abu Dhabi Urban Planning Council. So I've been with them ever since. I moved around different urban design studio, different teams. The latest one was one of my favorites, research, so R&D, right? Research and development with future shaping. And most recently, I'm working with DMT's contribution for Gadan 21 Accelerators Program. That's
Great,
it.
thank you for joining us, Olivia.
Thank you, my pleasure. Thanks for the invite.
Ahmed?
Yes, my name is Ahmed Al-Ali. I am a founder of X-Architects. I've been since I started my professional career, I started X-Architects, so I have no much richness to my portfolio. I'm a designer, architecture designer and master planner. Been involved definitely from the beginning in many projects and seen a lot of transformation, whether UAE or the region. And I love to contribute in terms of thinking and design and research and bring maybe a different perspective to the design world from this part of the world. Yeah.
And X-Architects is an award-winning consultancy as well, so it's great to have you here.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Hervoy, how are you?
I'm very well. Thanks for having me. Hi, everybody. So my name is Hervoy Sindrik. I'm a planner, designer. So actually, my first degree was planning, but then I got too excited about the design side of things and got into that as well. So I've been in Abu Dhabi now for also 10 years, and I work for Arab, which is a big international independent design and engineering firm. And, my role is really to look after the master planning and urban design jobs within the region here. but also get involved in also all various other projects that my team and my office is getting involved in. Yeah.
Great. So thank you all again. So let's get started. For the beginning, I would like to ask a question that comes to my mind in particular, which is, Hervoy, how do we measure actually, a city's resilience as a start? Each city wants to be resilient. They want to do the best, but what's the measure for it, and how can we identify the areas basically that we need to work on?
Yeah, and look, this is why Arup has been in that space for quite some time, and we basically, I think it's almost like 6-7 years ago, we started working with the Rockefeller Foundation to develop something which is called the City Resilience Index. And if you guys want to reach out, very happily share that with you, and there's lots of information about it, and it's openly available. But it is really, the idea behind it was to actually start defining what resilience means and what the various aspects of it are. Because I think that, just when we're talking about resilience, I think that, the textbook definition in that sense is this ability to withhold and withstand and thrive even under stress. So stress is a continuous thing, or under a shock, which is a sudden thing. And you tell me, I think that, the COVID thing was a shock, and now it's becoming a stress, right? So it actually starts to talk about what are the various aspects of that, what are the various aspects of urban resilience, and what are the dimensions under which you can do that. And it is evidence-based, so it's measurable. So the idea is that a lot of research was done on a lot of cities to identify what are the threats to the cities, and how can they respond to it in that sense. And it's a quite nice little approachable summary of at least the interpretation that Arup and the Rockefeller Foundation come up with around, the dimensions, the actions, and also the qualities that a city should have when it comes to resilience.
So it has a set of indicators, right? And then
so look, it's. I don't know if you wanted to show the slide real quick, then maybe we can. Maybe it'll be a little bit easier. So really the way that it works is that you have a so there you go. So this is what was the output of that actual research piece, and in a way this is being used by various cities across the globe now to help them identify where are their specific risks, and how they can actually prepare for stresses and shocks. So you'll see that there's the 4 dimensions, which are around leadership and strategy, the health and well-being. This is really about the people, right? So the fundamental thing is that we make sure that people are well in the cities that we build, run, and manage. The economy and the society. It's a whole other element. The thing that is really interesting to us as well as designers is the infrastructure and ecosystem, because that is the spaces that we're designing, the life supporting infrastructure, be it transport, be it ICT, all of these things that actually bring the services to us that actually allow us to survive and thrive in cities. And then the last thing is the leadership and the strategy. I already mentioned that, but that really incorporates also the people. And as you can see, as you go around there's the goals that have been identified. So this is things that you want to strive for in order to become a resilient cities. And all the way around then there's a series of indicators. And it's not on this slide, but in the middle there's then qualities that a resilient city has. So in an ideal framework, you go around and you analyze that, and you identify in which aspect, which dimension are you doing what as a city, and that then allows you to actually address and put an action plan together in order to ensure that you can, withstand the stress, withstand the shock better than what you would be if you're unprepared.
This is really interesting. Thank you for that, Hervoy. One thing, Olivia, I would like to ask you is that Resilience is a lot compared to sustainability. And would we say that it's very similar, or does one pick up after the other? Like, what's the relationship between the two? Just like what Hervoy have shared, can be easily confused to the UN sustainability goals. So what's the difference, or what's the relationship?
Well, I'll start. It's really a anecdotal personal opinion, because what's interesting about sustainability that I found that after I finished my master's, which I would think I would have understood what sustainability really means and how you define it, I was actually really shocked that I believe in this system that most of the world operates under, which is capitalism. It is impossible to be sustainable. So I'm almost going against the United Nations, and I'm being very kind of opinionated, so we can create a little bit of a, interesting talk. But United Nations Sustainable Goals are here. There's a lot of countries that take it very seriously, and you have number 11, which is the most relevant for us, I would argue, the sustainable cities. There's also other more important ones too. But I believe that it's so hard to pinpoint what sustainability really means. And then there's one wave that's kind of describing this, a lot of architects picking up on eco architecture, green architecture, a lot of greenwashing that has happened. And I think from my understanding and a bit of research that I have done, you see resilience coming up again, 90s kind of understanding coming from a risk management, change management, not really coming from architecture, right? So you have this resilience idea. And again, I appreciate Arab's indicators. It's really nice to see it graphically, because from my readings, what I get is that there is no such a well-defined understanding for both, for sustainability and for resilience. So what I also found very tricky from a sustainability perspective, when you think of the 3 pillars, nobody really wants to tackle the social aspect. The social is the most challenging one, which is to talk to people, to really get to know, to really have a deep understanding of the user needs, right? So as designers, as architects, and also as urban planners, we have an idea, a tendency to feel like we can speak on behalf of the community. So instead of focusing on a participatory approach, and I'm kind of answering the other question, but I'll go back to the sustainability and resilience. I feel like sustainability, I'm going to try and make it really layman terms, how I understand it. We want to prepare, yes, resilience is about preparedness, but in sustainability, we are putting common sense. It's common sense to not exhaust the environment's capability to provide for us, for our habitats, for our needs, right? So in other words, I always felt sustainability was really common. Of course, you're going to use rainwater to flush your toilet. Why isn't the whole world doing this, right? Collecting rainwater for areas, not for the UAE, right? I guess. But I'm just saying, like, there's certain things that you can do that are common sense for a sustainability perspective.
Yeah.
And with resilience, you're like, okay, sustainability is talking on this level, and resilience is, okay, so we are trying to prepare for it, whatever it is. It could be a nuclear, disaster. It could be a hurricane, and we are experiencing COVID. So the I can't say this word, for epidemics, the people who take care, who study epidemics, they've been warning us. So climate change have been warning us. So this is not it's an unprecedented crisis, yes, economic and health crisis, but it's not unexpected. It is not. Everybody, a lot of different scientists have been talking about it, have been warning, but it wasn't feasible to look at that. So what I'm trying to say is sustainability is like, yes, let us develop a little bit less. Let us not touch the biodiversity, or let's get some points and be LEED certified buildings to use less energy. And resilience, okay, so a hurricane came and destroyed. How prepared are we? So what are the actions that are in place? So do we have enough people with the know-how to support? Do we have enough infrastructure? So I guess I can stop talking now, but that's kind of my feeling of, they are concepts that work together. They're not the same. They complement each other. there's a bit of confusion if you're looking from an urban development professional or designers, or if you're looking at from a, forecasting. So research, my experience with R&D, and I'm very thankful for that because it opened my eyes to this whole field of forecasting. So resilience, in my opinion, is very much related to forecasting. How prepared are you to take the hit, like Hervoy was saying, you're in the stress, but do we want to go back to the pre-crisis, like, to the pre-COVID? Isn't this an opportunity? So future shaping goes, okay, should this happen? Should scenario 1A or 1C or 2B happen? Where do we want to go? So what are the policies that we are going to implement? So are we going to look at density? If we're going to have issues with epidemics, how are we going to look at our air conditioning in the UAE? Very relevant. Shouldn't be investing in technology for filtration, right? Air filtration and so on. So each context has its own needs and priorities. But I find it very interesting that when a crisis happens, it's a time for us to correct, because we live in a very unjust world. Social inequality is huge. Global warming is obviously scientifically, there's evidence for it. So there's so many issues that are happening, and I think as a society, our human species only has a willingness to adapt when really things are really terrible. We tend to kind of work in the comfort zone, like, oh well, I don't experience racism because I don't have that skin color, so I'm good. So for me, it's like if the most vulnerable person in a society has access to what all of us have the right to, then it's a true, inclusive, resilient society. So I find resilience and sustainability working together, but with different prioritizations. I hope that answered your question.
It does, yeah, it's different. So I don't know, the explanation was very, what's the word? Like very clear, what you were saying. So I was a bit confused even myself before, and I feel like your answer really answered it really well. So thank you for that. And then you were talking about context, which makes me move to my next question to Ahmed. And ex-architects, you're very well known for integrating culture with architecture and respecting, the context as a principle in developing the built environment. How does that locality on small scale impact, a macro scale of a city, and is also applied in urban development in terms of resilience?
Sure. Definitely. I mean, we are always interested. I mean, culture is also a very a broad and a subject that is very difficult to, let's say, pin. And you can't really make or design a cultural, let's say, considered building. You try your best to definitely, as much as possible, to think about culture as a moving target and something that is concurring and happening all the time and changing. And if you think about it this way, then it really becomes an interesting issue, because you are somehow trying to understand the issue or the problem of design from, let's say, okay, the perspective of now and the near future, let's say, or what can really that project in the near future and then the longer, let's say, term. So they always ask me, for example, how you really make a cultural relevant building. That's something that, but I don't really think about it this way. I try as much as possible to really do research, try to understand the need, the current need, and also the future need, and try at best guess, let's say, that this could be really designed in such a way that can accommodate these needs. And here, where it becomes the concept of identity and also culture is interesting, because you are talking about not the past, but about the future. And you are talking about really participating in something that could really add to, let's say, the human knowledge, and and be relevant to the generations, yeah, that left. So, for example, I'll give you an example. When we come to design, for example, in UAE here, for an Emirati, for example, how should I really consider? I should really be considering, let's say, the roots, the backgrounds, and so forth for a family, and the social aspects and so forth. But I should really look at the actual context that we are living in here. We in Emirates, for example, we think, I mean, we just launched, you know, to Mars, and we have a lot of ambition to really connect with the rest of the world and be global. We have also beautiful, for example, intervention and innovations on education, for example, online education and e-government, and all of these kind of being, let's say, innovative and looking at the near future. And this is becoming part of the identity of the UAE. And actually is adding to our resilience, coming back to the resilience. You know, when the COVID-19 happened, I still been able to finish all my work, and I've been able to also educate my children without any, I mean, with a little headaches, small headaches, definitely, but not really a complete collapse. And a bit of adjustment here and there, because we are not really comfortable, but we could have really continue education and complete the education. When I, as a designer, when I really look at this, I think when I design for people here, I'd like to really push this limit and to think about really what does this, for example, and if I'm designing for an Emirati or an Arab, what is an Emirati Arab modern person aspirations, aesthetics, concerns, and then do the best to match that. And definitely when you do, how you know you are doing an okay job, or let's say a good job, that usually you say, okay, they accept it. This is what we think who we are. And when you capture this spirit of time, it's very important that it becomes relevant all of a sudden, and not relevant to the person who is using it, or you've been designing for it immediately for the immediate purpose, but it might also become timeless and might even participate in the pool of knowledge of humanity, and becomes really capturing a specific period of time, spirit and thoughts and aspirations and thinking. So I think this is from maybe, I don't know if I'm clear, but from a designer point of view, the best things somebody tell us that your design is actually, or oh yeah, that project is timeless, or like you always refer to it after 10 years, 15 years, you said, oh, that's beautiful, still relevant, and still is not out of date, and but being seen as something fresh, and from that period that being represented.
Yeah, I feel like that definitely adds to the resilience in a way where you don't need to, these buildings are designed to stay, and for decades or even more to come. So definitely it's there to tell a story, to talk about the culture. And I like what you said about culture being a moving target. And then this adds to it for sure. So definitely, I mean, thank you for that. And speaking about, again, context, one question also that I often think about is that each city is very unique and has its own opportunities and issues. So Voy, how do we identify, just like you said, you showed us the index, so many goals, dimensions, indicators. who identifies or determines which issue is more important, and that this is needed to be addressed, instead of another one?
Yeah, look, I think that when it comes to chronic stresses, it's a little bit easier, right? Because we can actually pinpoint that, because it's something that we're very, very much familiar and aware with. When it comes to shocks, it's a little bit different. We have got, a rough idea, and we can go by precedent. So, for example, although we are where we are right now, although we are close to some very active earthquake zones, for example, I think that the at least our assessment, our assumption is that we're very, very safe in that sense. But I think that it really is about understanding your city and understanding, understanding what are the things that affect everybody. And I think that, coming back to Olivia's point, is it's really the resilience, and I mentioned that the resilience is about making sure that everybody is fine. Everybody in that city needs to be well preserved and well preserved and looked after. There's this, I don't know if you ever heard that saying, but we always hear that we're 5 meals away from anarchy, and that's the point. It doesn't help us if one part of the society is looked after well and gets their food while the other part is struggling with. So I think that every place is different, every city is different, and we need to kind of adjust to that specifically. But I think that what I find really interesting is how, and again, this was already mentioned, is like how we're very good at forgetting. We're very good at kind of forgetting about what it was like and going back to normal and some of those things. And for example, I coming to the city stage, what I find very interesting is that we, for example, on one hand, you hear a lot of concern around densities, for example, because it's very difficult to, and I never liked the social isolation. I like the physical isolation business, right? So I think that we're still socially interacting here. But when we're starting to see some of those things like this current situation that we're in, that makes it very obvious to us. It makes it very clear in our face. Here's what we're doing. Again, coming back to the index, it is that idea that you look at other cities and you look at what are the stresses, what are the potential shocks, and of course, some shocks in our environment here. If you think, for example, natural disasters is fairly low. Could our ICT infrastructure go down tomorrow, and the water pumps go down, and all of a sudden we don't get running water for a couple of days? There is a whole different level. I would say that, for example, in an arid environment like we are in, water stress is a huge thing. So you would want to make sure that your redundancies in the water system are extra strong, right? Whereas maybe if you were to sit in, I don't know, somewhere in upstate New York, then the water goes down, you're fine, because all you really need it is for drinking. It's not necessary, or you need it for a lot of things, but there's an abundance of the specific resource there. So it really goes down to being specific about what.
You're on mute, Herboy. You're on mute.
Mute.
Sorry, I apologize for that. But it really is about learning, it's really about looking at what other places are seeing and how they are going through it and how they're addressing some of these things. So it's that, and I think that, bringing it right down to here and the situation that we are in, I think it's, and I'm sure we'll do a lot of soul searching around what has happened and how it has impacted us and how it has affected us, and what we could be doing that we're to help us withstand this kind of shock, stress, whatever you want to define it as, going forward. Because me, for example, I would very much think that some of the things that we talk about good cities and livable cities, they would have helped us in this crisis, very much so, And we were doing some work with some of our young designers, actually, done some quite fun work, which we're going to share hopefully soon. But they were just talking about how, the qualities of their built environment, their urban environment, how they help them deal with the crisis. or how actually they thought that, you know, they would have really liked to have a balcony, you know. When you're locked up in your house, you'd love a balcony.
That's true.
And there's those little things that I think that we can fine tune and work out, and they will be specific and to the point. We cannot predict the future. I think you know, sustainability. We can see the kind of trends in which we're going. We'll never know what exactly will happen, but we can identify the trends and mitigate against those.
Yeah, and just like you said, we easily forget, and what matters is that we have people that are willing to remember and actually work towards not necessarily solving these issues, but at least learning from these lessons and adapting to them. So thank you for that. I would like to just remind our audience that the talk is being translated to Arabic live. مرة ثانية اللي حابين إنهم يسمعون الحوار باللغة العربية ممكن أنتم تغيرون القناة. So my next question, Olivia, because you slightly addressed that inclusivity and involving people in the design, and I feel like this is when it comes to, you know, resilience, how important is the involvement of the community? You said it is quite quite important, but how much of it do we need to determine the risk factors that should be addressed by decision makers?
So I think it's, well, extremely important. I think community should not just be included. It should be empowered in a way to help with, for example, mitigation, like Hervoy was saying. So it's not just about asking. So there's so many methodologies of community engagement. So I've learned not very long recently on the power of social listening. So there's very different methodologies that you can hear without also engaging. You can set up qualitative, deep, thick data, deep understanding with the support of professionals like anthropologists. So I'm not just saying us as designers, we can go and talk to, and you know, to our I'm going to talk about community not as a user, not as a private client, like Ahmed was describing, you know, your approach to read and what an Emirati family would like to have in a house, for example, a residence. When you start looking at a population, how does a designer or a public authority, right, a municipality, really understand the society? Because more often there's a lot of controversy around the world in participation. So you have, in terms of sustainability, you need a lot of players, a lot of stakeholders, right? So you have an investor, usually you need the private sector as an ally, not as against you, right? So we need to cross this native land, right? So full of biodiversity, we need it. We need to create a right-of-way or easement for a motorway, okay? So for transport, I'm just creating a scenario. So then there is a need, so other countries might have a participation that you need to include the community, reach out, understand who are the landowners impacted by that, right? That's not what I'm talking about. This is something that happens in other societies. There is a level of community engagement, which I find very advanced, which the UAE has. It's under the Majlis system. So for the citizens and the Emiratis, there are amazing, I would argue, democratic even, ways of reaching to the leadership in a system, in a fabric, in a community level way. So where you can express your concerns, you can voice your opinions, you can reach out to the leaders of your community and so on. So that's very unique for this culture. And again, for the Gulf Arabs, and I'm not going to say which regions, but I'm just saying, I know that for the UAE, this is very valuable, and it should be, and it's still continuing. And of course, there's the gender separation, but both genders have access to expressing themselves, right? But if you go to the inclusion of community in a resilience context, it's very important to look at the community as a stakeholder. So with the provision of information and tools, when the stress happens, when the chaos, when something happens, they're not just a vulnerable population. So how do you reach for the most vulnerable and empower them? And I know that feminists don't like the word empower, like we don't need empowerment, right? You can go and, we're not gonna go there, but I'm just saying, how do you provide with the correct information, the tools for them to be very strong stakeholders in this preparedness for the worst, right? So for example, if we taught our children, right? So it starts in school, right? So this is a long term, there's different timings for this. So we need to know, okay, so if this happens, if there is no more water for 30 days, what are we gonna do? How do we survive in an environment? So this is very raw, right? But if you think of securing the trust of the community in each other. So over here in the UAE, we have it's a very unique and a very kind of fascinating coexistence of different cultures. So for a community to be sustainable and complete and therefore resilient, right? So complementary, the community must feel that it belongs. So for me to belong, for me to feel that I belong, I must be seen by others. Right? So there is a lot of tolerance that happens, but I believe one of the priorities for the UAE would be to research with the help of different disciplines, with the designers, with the public authorities, with anthropologists, with the epidemiologists, I can't say it, so people with like biodiversity, environmentalists, we all need our expertise together, and the community. So we have community leaders, because what's their most important, and I read this in an amazing article, is that the community, not here in the UAE, doesn't trust the governments. So even though the government might be feeling, there's a lot of corruption, like Brazil, let's talk about Brazil. So there's a huge mistrust in the government. What they're doing now with the COVID, I don't even need to talk about it. It's just really embarrassing. So when a community, so let's say they got a grant from the World Bank, they have money, and they're going to come as a government entity and reach out to these communities who live in the favelas. There's very little trust. The people were not involved in the decision making of what's best for them. The people also know what's best for them. They might not have the training that all of us got. We might understand where to place the door, where to place the air conditioning unit, the orientation of our building in the land. Yes, we've been trained. We were, very privileged. So we must also, as designers, really understand the level of privilege that we receive by being highly educated. We do not represent the majority in the world. So there's a lot of indigenous and traditional knowledge that is readily available in communities where there is there's a distance, right? There's a disconnect between the, again, I'm going to talk about Brazil. So how the community knows about the biodiversity, which plants to eat and what not to eat, which ones are, sorry, I'm talking too much, but I'll just finish this one. It's like community knowledge, community information about their own land, their own resources, not going up, right? So there is no way of reaching the leaders, and the leaders assuming they know what's best. So when they come and go, okay, here are their masks, let's say, they don't use the masks, so they don't believe that there's anything wrong. It's just the government telling us something. So there's this interesting lack of inclusion. That's my answer to your question.
May I just really quickly, because I find it very interesting what you just said there, Olivia, because this anthropological thing, this whole thing, what I always am fascinated with is, cities are super complex. They're complex systems to begin with. They're complex because we're complex, right? Look at us around the screen here. We're all very different. We all have a completely different notion of what is good, what is bad for us, And I think that's where the community engagement is critical here, because it is this thing about, I personally would not know what is important to somebody, for example, in a worker's accommodation, the way that they live and the way that certain stresses impact them. And at the same time, I mean, you do this with your clients, right? You try to understand what their life is like, what are they doing, and I think that that's the point about the community consultation and the resilience point of view, because some of the things that I might, first world problems that might be a huge issue for me, for somebody else, they are not going to be an issue, or they're way apart. And I think that this is where this process of thinking about resilience actually helps us to make sure that we meet the basic needs of everybody. There's an inconvenience which has to be acceptable, but we have to kind of set the threshold. And I think that this is again about the resilience. It's about everybody. In that sense. Sorry to jump.
I mean, if I just may, it's very difficult also. To create a balance between a down-top approach and top-down approach.
Mm-hmm.
And here definitely where the community could play definitely the community has a much larger base and much more organic and more complex. And that could be really breaking a kind of a different and complex issues into a smaller, let's say, portions that the communities or different groups or different religious interest or political interest or social interest they could really cater to. It's very difficult for one entity to absorb the complexity of a complete system. So at the same time, it's very important also, and here also we saw it in UAE, that when the leadership also start to interact with the community, there are also very strong and very fast to achieve agendas. Yes. And either way, the community down-top approach or top-down approach, I think both of them, they have to work together to really create the balance, and otherwise one of them will fail. If one system is more strong than the others, definitely you will see a problem, or you see, let's say, things that are not being approached properly, which result into gaps, which gaps will result into unresilience. There is very interesting actually. When you're studying the Islamic communities in the mid ages, I mean, when you see that there are a lot of responsibilities being, let's say, broken down to the communities,
Mm-hmm.
And that is very obvious in terms of the urban design and the city as a holistic kind of thing. There are a lot of negotiations and a lot of discussions among communities themselves, and somehow they are in charge of their, let's say, decisions and planning and creating their own city and participating. And this is a very interesting actually, because you could really create a more, see, sometimes when you really want to tackle complex problems, sometimes, for example, issue like food, for example, if you want to really approach it from top down, it really becomes a very difficult matter to really take the responsibility for. But if you really try to have an organic way of really dealing with the issue and allow people to, let's say, grow their own food, be aware of their own food, and also participate at least in that system, that problem becomes very simple actually, and becomes the people will become responsible of their own portion of participation. I'm taking, of course, food because I could really relate to, or I could really make. I mean, it's really important to make, for example, government initiation of investment and giving lands and allowing people to, and also channeling some of the, let's say, visions towards certain things. But again, it's too much responsibility, on a complex responsibility to be held by the government, and also too much investment too. But when you think from down-top approach, you will see that the problem is actually not really that difficult, and and people could really participate in that and reduce the heavy, let's say, responsibilities from the, let's say, leaders or the city, let's say, leaderships or the country leadership. So the two system, I think, is very important to coexist, and we need to learn also how they could really coexist, because there are not a very simple answer. There are culture differences, definitely. I mean, there are many concepts, like, for example, the concept of democracy, for example, in the West, and the concept of shura in the East here. The concept of, you mentioned something beautiful, the majlis, in majlises we are allowed to sometimes fight, scream, and whatever. But again, the opinion, let's say, or the decisions is being channeled in a completely different way, to the leadership, to the concerns. That is not almost an individual expression, but rather than maybe there is a certain ways that are or the group, let's say, decision or concerns and all of that is given to the leader. So it's very important that this could also mature by time, because if you really break that one and you break it into a system, then you will be able to have a much more, let's say, resilience system that it's not easy to break or to let's say be shaking completely in front of one simple trauma or a challenge. Yeah. So it doesn't fail, actually. It finds its own way to support each other.
Yeah, and if we, just like you said, in the past, and then even centuries ago, the people, they would be hit by whether it's a natural disaster or whatever thing it is, and then they would get up on their feet and move on and learn from that, because they've been living in a certain way according to the natural environment they're in. When people live in forests or in different places, deserts, whatever it is, they are aware of their context and how they can survive, and then they also can adapt to any shock that can happen. So definitely people know what's best, and maybe not always, but just like you said, it's very important to involve them in all these important decisions.
Just one more comment. Sorry, Herboy. Can I say just one tiny thing?
Please.
Najla, what you said about, yes, the involvement, and I love what you explained, Ahmed, about both ways having this balance, this harmony. It's about harmonizing this two approaches. I'll just give you a very interesting, very simple example from a planner's perspective. Everybody might want a little bit of more space in front of their plot for themselves, right? So you're, as an Emirati, you might be given a plot, and then it is, the government's role to make sure you get your plot. It's your right. It's a housing right. It should be everyone's in the world housing right? We can argue this, but alhamdulillah, you guys are able to count on a government that supports this civic right? So you have a plot. And then you, as a family, you say, I want to get the front of my plot for me. There's no problem. There's no difference for my neighbor or the other neighbor. I'm not impacting anybody, right? So these mini decisions of in the majlis or in a different way, it's important for the leadership to also explain the impact, whether it's negative or positive. It's not, I don't have an opinion on this, but as an individual, you might not be able to see the collective. What is the greater interest of the people? So from a public health perspective, the way that even doctors think, and I'm not a doctor, I'm not in a health industry, but they already know that statistically speaking, some people will have to die. So for herd communities, so as an individual, it's very difficult for us to have this conversation because it could be my mom, could be your mom, could be our friend, could be me, right? But in a health conversation, when they look at communities on a different scale, they say 1% will have to perish for the greater good of the community. So these are very difficult conversations, like Ahmed was saying, it's very complex because who can announce that, okay, everybody, 1% of all of you will have to die, so our future generation can survive. You know, so these are very difficult. I mean, plot conversations are much easier than health industry. So
yeah, thank God we're dealing with plots.
Hi, boy.
Look, I was just really, this point about culture, and Ahmed, you said that culture, where is it? Where is it? And really, it is that thing, right? It just keeps on building. You know, we have a foundation in the culture and it keeps on moving. And if you start thinking about the way that, you know, somewhere where we're here, where it's extremely diverse, I think that it's building on a certain culture, but it's evolving and it's growing into a different thing. And I think that, you know, as we said in Majlis, it's fundamentally a fantastic system to engage with your people. So it's about really, you know, would be interesting. How do we take that to the next level, and how do we really, you know, allow us to make sure that we're looking after everybody? Because ultimately, you know, a more equitable place is just more resilient, because there is not, everybody's in this situation. We're all in one boat. Doesn't matter anymore. So, you know. The virus doesn't care. It's going to get us all. So it's really, well, you have to think about it that way. Anyway.
I think maybe we can move on to the audience's questions. Maybe we'll answer like one or two. One here that I see is, do you think resilience changes the current process of design? Ahmed, maybe you can answer that, and then Herboy and Olivia, because yes, we talk about resilience, but are we really thinking about it, you know, when we design, or is it, you know, one aspect maybe?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, it's see the type. I would say from a practice point of view, because I mean, the type of projects after COVID-19 is coming to our office is completely different than the type of projects that is coming before. So it is really changing design. Yes, it's changing even the brief and the type of projects that is happening. Many people, I mean, many now initiation are coming with the concept of resilience. For example, we have now lots of, we receive a lot of inquiries to design food storages, for example. We are having a lot of inquiries to support sustainable farming, let's say, master planning or planning. We are receiving these kind of projects that are now related to not a luxury or not anticipation or not a real estate speculations. It's a real, lots of, for example, inquiries about the health, building small health centers, distributing it, but changing even some of the existing structures to accommodate the challenges that we are facing with COVID-19 and so on. So yes, it is changing. Now, maybe I understand this question from, let's say, this point of view, but another point, is it really we design in a way that we make our architecture more resilient? As I mentioned, if you consider, see, it's the worst thing for the architects if you design something that is not very flexible and not changing. Because the moment you finish the building after 10 years, maybe the purpose of this building completely changed. Maybe the way of thinking about this building is changed. So if it's really flexible, could absorb the change to a certain level and could really help. And the more intelligent the building, the more it can really participate in a much longer. We've seen in some European cities, for example, that buildings exist for hundreds of years and still being repurposed, being loved and taken care of. And you can imagine if it's hundreds of years, the people who lived or designed it never imagined that this could really work and be loved across many, many generations. So here where the architects is actually could really design something that is more valuable emotionally to people, and they could really take care of it and repurpose it throughout time, which means, again, resilience. Unfortunately, in many of our cities, especially here in the Gulf, I will be very critical. And some cities are very new here. I mean, 60, 50 years. Some of them 30 years, some buildings, and you don't want to really look at it, it cannot, you feel it's so old. And when you go to some of it's an eye-opener when you go to some European cities or Italian cities, when you find, okay, I was with the tour guide when he said, I told him, is this building is old? He said, no, this is not really old. I mean, this is maybe around 500 years. It's not really that. So I said, come on. I mean, he's not talking about even a very ancient kind of structures that are existing and still operating till today. And imagine how this means how less you can spend, and how the whole city is working in a complex way to meet the current needs. And become a point of not a burden that you have to demolish the whole thing and then reinvest again thing and rebuild the whole thing, because after 50 years, nothing is really valid anymore. Nor technically, nor not even you want to preserve it aesthetically, or has no emotional connection that you want to keep and carry on. We understand that there are certain levels of course, changing, and this is very healthy and keep the community and so forth. And this is, of course, very important. Change is important, but not change, not in, okay, khalas, demolish, rebuild, demolish, rebuild. It's about the complexity of the system of changing, while other things are still working together,
Hervoy, how about from a master planning point of view, or city development, let's say, point of view?
Look, I think that this has probably been an eye-opener for a lot of people about the shortfallings of the cities that, and we built the cities that are on vogue at the time when we built them, right? So we built the cities, for example, the cities of the Middle East are very much a product of what was commonly accepted to be the way that the future of city life will be, right? I think that specifically here we have seen a huge amount of shortfall in terms of our ability to service our needs when we are in a situation like we were, for example, here, where we are locked down, right? And again, harping back to some of the things that the communities do actually, Ahmed, you said that people know what they need, people know what they need. And Olivia, you were talking about people actually appropriate the space to their needs, right? I think in that sense, I would like to think that we really have an opportunity here to kind of not forget what it was like, and just think about what was the thing that you were really missing whilst you were in this situation, and what would the difference have been. I always find it, I'll give you one example which perplexed me. In Abu Dhabi, the one space that whilst all of the European cities were opening up the spaces for more car, for more cycling, for more walking, the one place in Abu Dhabi where walking and cycling is actually, it's been designed for it, has been shut down. And it was like this, it is this thing about that, it really is, people yearned, that activity. People really yearned, and I think that you can see that now as things are opening up. I remember the pictures when the Dubai beaches opened for the first time. I was like, whoa, what's going on here? But I think that we've got a lot to do in that sense, and I always like to think about it. There's one dimension in city making that is the constant, and it's not going to change, and it's kind of like our shoulder width, right? It's about the human element. We're not going to change that much. I've got maybe a little bit wider shoulders than you, Olivia, but it's that we need to design to, and it's that the way that we need to think about it. So. Yeah, I really hope that we make the most of this, really, because a lot of the things that I'm hearing, what people are pushing for, is things that we've been, at least in the current format, we're saying is good for people and good for cities.
Olivia, would you like to add anything, or?
I thought could I answer another question that I liked?
Please
That,
go ahead.
do we have time?
Let's answer it briefly and.
Okay, I like this. Since UAE has lots of, it's a multinational country, how can we incorporate different cultures in designing? So I think this is a very good question. Now that I have the answer, I thought if you talk to people in that way that I was, saying, like you can do it via social listening, social media, when they don't really know that you're listening to them, but for a good purpose, not to sell them more Amazon.
Yeah.
So use artificial intelligence for something good. Like it's not the technology that it's bad or evil. It's what you do with it, right? So it would be interesting to do that. So I think that anthropological engagement would really provide a designer. Is it a designer? Yeah, in designing. Mm-hmm. So it would give us the insight into what really matters for that community. So there's a, for example, if you were going to design a park, right, or a public space, a shared space where these different nationalities are going to coexist, hopefully interact. And one of the biggest things about resilience is diversity. You want to diversify your economy. You want to diversify your workforce, right? You want to, so Ahmed, you were saying you had some Brazilian designers in your company for a little bit, so you learn from every nationality that you bring into your design. They bring a little bit of their culture, and there's so many different ways of doing the same thing, right? The whole globalization doesn't want us to think that. We all should be listening to the same song. We should all be having the same iPhones, right? That's the opposite. But if we look at the diversity of the world and the quality of our language, like so many of us speak more than one language, right? At least Emiratis, you guys speak Arabic and English. So you see that there is no right way of doing something. So just accepting, being more flexible, like Ahmed said, perhaps it's less about the designer's ego and more about the interesting coexistence of different ways of doing the same thing. So the Indian community in Abu Dhabi might be interested in cricket because they've been colonized by the British. So that's why I'm assuming, it's a big statement, but that's why I assume they like playing cricket. The Brazilians like playing football. Another English introduction there, even though whatever, but rugby. So different communities would like to occupy that space, so make use of that space. So as a government, let's say, entity, so you would create, and Filipino community likes basketball, right? In Abu Dhabi, you would have a space. How would the designer then, I'm not talking about architecture, right? I'm talking more about different scale. You would put markings that would allow for all of the modalities to be played. So different people, different communities will all feel included. So they will feel that they matter, right? So everyone matters. I am being heard. I love Abu Dhabi because the space, Abu Dhabi city, I'm talking about Abu Dhabi because that's where I work, but the city recognizing all the communities' diversity and allowing for it. And that's what's happening, right? We have projects. So this is a simple marking on the floor, right? You might not have a full-on official, football pitch, but you might have just different things that are very simple, very cost-effective, and everybody gets happy. So I'm just saying it's perhaps about the designer being less present, right? So it's about, oops, I didn't have here. But it's not about me. It's more about you. What do you want? How can we make you feel important and belonging to this place, to this architecture, for this park or the city? And that's how cities get more resilient and more competitive. Everybody wants to attract the best talent. So how do we get the best of the best to be here, right? Or in New Zealand or Brazil? So, this attracting diversity. I like this question, so thank you to Asma.
And thank you all. I'm afraid our time has come to an end. This has been a very wonderful discussion. Hopefully we are on the right path to resilience. And the most important lesson I think we're taking from today is inclusivity. And that's one aspect, of course. So thank you all. And on behalf of you, Olivia, Hervoy, Ahmed, the Shuruq team, myself, I would like to thank our audience for joining us. So stay tuned for our next week's talk, which is going to be about modern versus traditional design. It will be taking place again on Wednesday, the 29th. And until then, stay safe and goodbye. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
So much. It's been great. Thank you.